for the Q&A in the chat.
Yeah, I will keep on putting that actually. So
Yeah.
because when people join, then they don't see the last chat.
Yeah, good. So that's just this is a bit of a maintenance. So and Shrikant will be helping me out with looking at all the questions. I know from experience that I don't, when I'm focused on speaking and kind of getting the story straight, I don't have enough time in my brain to really kind of look at the chat. So Shrikant will be helping me out there. And Shrikant, by all means, if there is any question you think is relevant at that moment, just say it while I'm presenting it. So that's no problem. So what we'll do today is I'll do a bit of a story on story mapping, so kind of like the theory behind it and how it works, and then we'll play a game together. There is based on the game I created in the past with a colleague. I've also been teaching this to a school in the Netherlands, or a university or high school in the Netherlands. And they have created an electronic version of the game, which is pretty nice. So that's something that you all can use. And I hope to provide you the opportunity, just maybe for 10 minutes in this session, to split apart and do a bit of a session together with the game, and I'll show you how it works, so you can get a bit of experience in. And finally, I hope to, if we do all this right, then we'll still have some time for some Q&A at the end. So that's the things we're going to be doing. So without further ado, I will share my screen for the presentation part. And which is, I'll just share the desktop. It's easiest. Okay. Is it visible, Shrikant?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, thanks. So what you see here, by the way, right now is the game. We'll come back to that later. And there's actually two things. There is the core presentation that I've been giving now for maybe 10 years or so. But there's some new stuff that I created what I want to give as a bit of a highlight and how these things could work in a more like scaled setting. Just a very simple example. And so I'll switch back and forth between the two presentations. So, so first let's talk about story mapping. Now you see my name and Marco Mulder. Marco Mulder is the colleague who at that time, way back in the past, created the game with me. So that's why I still have his name here. So let's talk about why we want story mapping. What's the reason? What's the need for it? Why would we do such a thing? And so one of the big things is that product backlogs are pretty fine-grained normally. If you look at the standard product backlog, they are geared actually with respect to the granularity for a team's purpose. Now, if you look at the team and you want to use Scrum in a good way, and you want a nice cadence, you want to be pulling back stories from the backlog, you want somewhere between like 5 to 20 items in a sprint, right? That's a nice granularity. That's a nice granularity to work with. However, that granularity is way too low if you want to, for instance, talk with an overview with your stakeholders. They won't see the forest for the trees. It'll be way too fine-grained. And so you need a higher level to kind of reason about things, and also to think about how do we construct, out of all those little small user stories, how do we construct the bigger things? So that's what we have this tool for. And I think story mapping is the crucial tool for this. So another thing to say is that your stakeholders, they aren't really interested in the sprints per se, because a sprint is really about inspecting and adapting and simply going like, how are we doing? Are we doing well? Are we doing bad? Should we change something? That's really what a sprint is about. What your stakeholders are really interested in is about satisfying their business goals, which may or may not be mapping onto a sprint. Very often, like maybe for something which has a large releases, or for instance, that's very common in the SAFe framework, you'll need multiple sprints to actually come to a full release. Now, of course, that doesn't have to mean that it's always multiple sprints, right? There are sometimes you can actually have a release per sprint. There are even teams, and especially with a lot of Kanban teams, who actually go faster than that and will deliver every user story separately. I mean, it's all possible. But I just wanted to make sure that we make a distinction between kind of the granularity level, which is related to releasing stuff, and the fact that that's not automatically related to a sprint. So what we're trying to do here is to really get at that release level. What are we going to be releasing fully end-to-end? So this is the most important picture. If you understand this one well, you will understand what story mapping is all about. So the top one is the picture of the Mona Lisa. And as you can see, like from the top left, you see that it's all in very beautiful, like oil painting already. And basically it grows larger and larger until you have the full painting at the end. So what you have here is a version where, and that's I think the big thing to note here, is that even though it's not a full painting yet, that part of the painting is already full in oil paint, right? It's already like perfectly made, even though it's not a full product yet. The bottom one is the one we'd really like to go for. The one that you have a full picture, you have a whole drawing or a whole painting or whatever. And so maybe you start with just a drawing, pencil drawing, and then it becomes more beautiful. And then you make, like, as you can see here in the example, the hand position changes, and then it becomes watercolor, and it gradually gets more and more beautiful until you get the full oil painting version of it. Now, there's nothing within Agile in any way, shape, or form that doesn't prevent you from using the top version. If you have one screen or you have a series of screens to go through in a user flow, then by all means you can, go for screen one and just make it perfectly like here in the oil painting, and then continue on with screen two. There's nothing like intrinsically in Agile or the way of working in Agile that prevents you from doing that, but it's not the right way of doing things. You want the bottom version. You want the version where you first have this complete product, but it's like ugly and it doesn't, it's still functional, but it's not, it doesn't have the full features that you want. And the cool thing about this is that you're actually splitting the notion of objective quality in the sense of I have a product that actually works end to end, and subjective quality, which is the version where you say, well, actually, we as customers or your stakeholders think this one version is beautiful enough that we'd actually like to go live with it. And the nice thing about the bottom version is that you could go live at any one of those moments, because every time you have a full objective quality, full end-to-end product. And in my experience, when you use story mapping right, or you use this way of thinking right, you already go live after about 40% of your original your targets. And that's actually pretty powerful. The reason it doesn't work for the top one in this analogy is because as you are working on the top items, you don't have a complete product until the end. So this moment of objective quality and subjective quality, they fall on the same moment. So you have no choice of releasing earlier. And that's what this is all about. So let's look at what a story map really is. So here is like a schematic picture of what a story map is. So the top end, and I hope I can hear. So I hope you can see my cursor. So the A, B, C, D at the top, that's just means end to end. Now, normally in like 90% of the cases, this maps onto something, for instance, like a user journey or a customer journey or a use case or whatever. But it's simply the steps your users go through end to end to make sure that the end they have achieved some business goal. That's what that is all about. That's not something that ends up in your backlog. It's simply like the backbone. If you're reasoning about this, you want something to go end to end. And the reason this view is so important is because whatever you're going to be building, whatever you're going to be doing, has to cut across the whole business process. Otherwise, there's no use. There's simply no use in just perfecting step B while step A, C, and D are not working. Has no use whatsoever. So what we really try to get to in the story mapping style of thinking is that we're constantly slicing across the process and kind of perfecting it all as we go along. So that's why we call the horizontal axis the fully functional axis, and the vertical axis the fully featured axis, in the sense of cooler, better, harder, cheaper, like, anything goes. And that's also why you see in the bottom right, where I also say the extra work is inside the features. Now, very often I hear, well, we have to choose between this or that feature. That's actually not the case. In the sense, if a feature would be one of these processes, then what you often find is that it's not a choice of using this process of A, B, C, D versus another one. It's the choice between using the top of this, cutting out all the fat at the bottom here, because that's maybe beauty that you don't need at that moment, and simply proceed with another process. But at least you have the choice there, right? There's nothing saying you can't, implement the full story map if you want to. And that's important here. You have the choice to do it or not to do it. So that is what story maps are. I must say one thing. There's one gripe I have, and I have this with just about the whole world, and especially with tool vendors. Every tool uses story maps wrong. And I'll tell you why. Because what you see often is that if you use a story mapping tool or any technique, they say that this A here at the top, that's an epic or some other higher level concept like a feature or whatever the hierarchy naming is that you use. And then they put the A1, the A2, and the A3 under it. And this makes no sense whatsoever. And I'll explain you why. Let's go to the next slide. So if we map this Mona Lisa picture onto this story mapping, you see you go basically in the vertical. So it's like an ugly version, and it tends to have a nickname, the walking skeleton, right? It's kind of ugly. It's not something you really would want to give to your customers, but it already works, right? You can kind of cut through the whole process end to end, and you keep slicing through it as you go along. And so the Mona Lisa is basically projected in the vertical on this thing. Now, if you see here, the thing I called walking skeleton and then slice 2, slice 3, that is the actual unit of delivery that you want. You want to cut through horizontally and say, well, first we have the first basic version. So A1, B1, and D1, they belong together. And they are the thing that you can say, now we can, do something new. And then slice 2, which is a higher level goal consisting of A2. And then apparently we're going to be doing step 3 a bit further. So C1, C2, C3. So adding that on top and then saying, okay, and now we can start selling bananas, right? And then slice 3, and now we can start selling oranges and kind of end. And every time with this notion in the back of your mind, and we can do it end to end. We've implemented it end to end. And so this is the reason why literally every tool vendor has done it wrong, because they make A, B, C, and D the epics, whereas the walking skeleton slice 1 and slice 2, that should be the epics. So I hope with this change, and if you use your own story maps, you can look at your own implementations and you can fix this for yourselves. And if you think that it's just me talking, I've actually checked it with Jeff Patton, the guy who coined the term story mapping. And I checked it with him, like, am I nuts or is this the case? And he said, no, you're right. That's the way it should do it. And that's also how he taught it to me. So I think it's important to note, be careful when you're using story mapping tools. So how does this whole thing relate? So at the bottom level is what we're used to, like the product backlog with its fine-grained user stories. And then if you kind of ask yourself, why is the top item the top item? Why are the top 3 items the top 3 items? And this thing here represents this represents the story map. So that's probably because these top 3 items here are the top slice that we want to implement. That's the reason we have the top 3 in the backlog, or at this story maps level. And why is that? Well, because we have some product vision. We want to have some like higher level capabilities in. And why is that? Because we have these business goals. So as you can see, there's this iron chain going why upwards. I call this thing the hierarchy of intent. And so the story map kind of fits in the middle between a product backlog and a product vision. And that's where it has its place. It kind of translates kind of the higher level goals to the lower level stuff. So before we get into a case, I also want to kind of explain a bit with another case I had in another presentation. Just to kind of, also give maybe a bit for a feel how it would look like in a maybe a bit of a larger setting with a bit of a more concrete example. So let's say we're in a telco and we have like this very big goal. Management has this big goal. They want to implement a family plan XL, right? It's a nice marketing term. One plan for all your needs. And what we have now, if we look at the bottom left, we just have this very simple system. You have one subscription, one phone number, that's it. We don't have any other functionality beyond that. And so there's some ideas here. What could we do to implement the family plan? So some ideas could be that you can add your child, which would mean that you would have to have my multiple numbers connected to a single subscription, the parent subscription, or phone within the family. So if you have multiple numbers with this in the subscription, you can get a discount or something like that. Maybe a streaming service, right? That you can connect a streaming service like Spotify or something like that. And of course, parents in control, right? Setting the limits on those child accounts. So those are like 4 ideas. So how would these get implemented and how would you go about this? So let's say, for example, and I have some experience with telco, that there's often teams who are specialized in the onboarding part of it, right? So the moments are people choosing their phones, choosing a subscription, and then finally everything gets provisioned. You get your number and that gets connected to your phone, and then you can start calling. So if they look at it and they go like, well, let's do the add your kid part. Now we have to go, okay, for it to be useful, we have to cut across the whole process. And it could be something, for instance, like choose a subscription, choosing your phone for yourself, entering in your personal details, paying stuff, and then the phone gets provisioned, right? Like a simple process. So it could look something like this. So if the team would be asked, the onboarding team would be asked, like, if you want to implement this add your kid stuff end to end, what do you need to do? And so they go like, okay, well, yeah, in subscription part, choosing, we need to do something extra because it was always just new subscriptions. But now you have to choose an existing one and then add the child subscription to it. So that's new, which also means we need to log in as a current customer. We didn't have that in the functionality. Okay, that's step 1. Choosing your phone. Well, the team says, well, yeah, do you want anything different for choosing child phones? And the manager goes like, nah, we'll just use the same functionality. Okay, fine, nothing there. Entering personal details. Well, there's nothing really new there, right? Because it's the existing customer adding a new phone in, new subscription, so nothing there. Okay, fine. Accept and pay. Well, there we have to kind of, instead of just creating a new subscription, we have to pull out the old subscription and append it and change it. Okay, that's new. And finally, with provisioning the phone, it's again not connected to a new subscription, but it's added to an existing subscription. So there's a change there. So this is the way the onboarding team says, if we do these 5 things, we'll have it cut across end to end. Great. So this is how you use story maps, right? You kind of try to cut across the whole system. And so basically you have kind of something like a hierarchy of goals. And if you use like tools like Azure DevOps, if you for your backlog tooling, you kind of see how this all fits in, right? If you are using a tool like Azure DevOps, or like in limited fashion Jira, because it only really allows 2 levels, you would put the family plan Excel kind of user higher level epic at this level. You would have 4 features, add your kid plan, etc. And under that, you would have these 5 user stories, right? So that's kind of how you would use a hierarchy of goals. And this is how story mapping fits in there as well. So I also wanted to give, because often in these cases, we're not just in one team, but we're on multiple teams. I wanted to share this with you to kind of give you a feel for how you would coordinate across multiple teams and how that would work. So just remember that a team of teams is again a team. So, right, so all the same Scrum principles apply. You would have a higher level backlog and things like that. So you have stand-ups and the way of working, which is very similar to what you're used to. So if we would have 2 teams, now let's say that we have the onboarding team and the invoicing team, and both need to work together to implement the whole functionality end to end. Let's see how that goes. So again, we have this add your kid functionality, and we already have the onboarding team on the left side, right? We have there always there. And then so we also ask the invoicing team, okay, given that this is the higher level goal, this is the higher level thing we all need to do together, what do you need to do at your end of the invoicing as an invoicing team? So they go like, well, collecting call detail records, no, it's just a subscription, so there's nothing new there. Calculating the cost, no, there's no special rates what we have for the children, so nothing there. Generating invoices, here's something new. Instead of just having the single phone number that have to be put into the invoice, we'll have to also add all the child costs into the same invoice. That's new, so we'll have to make a change there. Okay, fine. And sending it, no, nothing new, it just gets emailed. So the invoicing team says, well, if we want to implement this thing end to end, this is our change. And so here you kind of see how powerful this can be to say, okay, a team is a common goal. And if each have their processes clear and you ask them, what's your contribution to the higher level cutting across goal? This is how teams can then coordinate to make sure that the functionality fits end to end. And so if you would have this hierarchy of goals and you would use a tool like that, all you really see that you, and now I've added basically the team names on this, that the onboarding team has these 5 user stories, the invoicing team has this user story, and the whole bunch of this together implements the add your kid plan. Boom, you've coordinated everything across teams. So that's how you would use story mapping in a wider sense. Okay, this is part of the other planning. So I'd like to switch now to play a game with you guys. So I'll first explain the case, because there is kind of like a story to this. I'll explain the tool, and then I'll ask Shrikant to divide you all up into different, this is going to be completely random. So by all means, take the chance if you don't know somebody to get to know them. And then for 10 minutes, you can kind of discuss how it goes and how this works, etc. And then kind of play around with it a bit. And then you can all come back together. And then if you all come back together, we can then have a bit of a discussion around, how did it go and what did you learn? Let's see. Yeah, so let's start with the case. So we are Birdco. So we are a joint venture of the Yellow Pages. I don't really know. You probably have them. Shrikant, do you have those in India? I don't know really. Yellow Pages, probably you do, right? At least now I'm so old. Like
we don't. I mean, we have the idea of the Just Dial here actually.
Yeah, because just thinking about it, my kids don't even know that there's such a thing as Yellow Pages. My age is showing here, right? So so the Yellow Pages, like they're an organization basically dealing with information, and books and in the industries and things like that. and an investor, and they want to kind of create a new company based on that. And so, of course, we have a company vision: freedom through information. Just as a side note, if you want, I can already give you the URL for the tool for the story mapping game, and that you can look it up. Wait, my cursor is gone. Oh, there it is. I found it. Copy. Where did the chat go? Let's see. Chat. Boom. So I just put the game in the chat. Just make sure to care a bit. It's a single page application. The moment you refresh it, the whole thing will reset. So later, if you start playing the game, it's always good for one person to share their screen, and then discuss it together, etc. Because as the current version is not multi-user yet, so just take that into account. So the moment you kind of reload the page, you basically reset the game. So okay, so let's continue with the story. So freedom through information. That's what we want. It's our company vision. I am your CEO. You guys are all the team. And we're going to ask you, like, how are you going to be implementing this whole thing? We, of course, have a product vision. So we're going to create a mobile food finder. Now, apps like these nowadays exist, but as you can see in the picture, how old this case is. At that time, there weren't any food finders at the point. So for people on the road who need to find their restaurant, we have this mobile app that can find a restaurant for them. And as a differentiating statement, we think, at some point we can create a marketplace that brings restaurants and guests together and make our money that way. So, of course, what's my CEO's plan for world domination? Pretty standard for an app. Let's first give away the tool for free, the app for free, make sure that everybody starts using it. Then maybe we can start making some money with irritating advertising. And finally, maybe we can do some reservation outsourcing, that we can kind of make the restaurants kind of outsource their reservation process to us, and we can make money that way. That's kind of the plan here. So short term, we as a company need to prove to our investors that we are a viable business. So the companies, they will host anything necessary in their infrastructure. That's our company. And we get 3 months of initial investments. And then we go live. And then after the 3 months live, they will choose for another 3 months. So as you can see here, like our pretend calendar, it's the 15th of January. We have a bit of time to prepare and to make our decisions. The 1st of February, we'll start the development. So basically, you're planning kind of for that period of time, for the 1st of February until the 1st of May. So if we're looking at 2-week sprints, it would be 6-week sprints. And then after it goes live, then there's a go, no go moment. This is kind of the high level story of the whole thing. So basically, here's now the question to you is, how are you going to be implementing this? What are you going to be doing? Now, to constrain that already a bit, we're just going to be focusing on the restaurant guest. So the functionality for the restaurant guest, there's all kinds of stakeholders and persona people you could use about this, like restaurant owners, but we're not going to be focusing on them just now, just the core functionality for the restaurant guest. And so here we have like the assignments. Given the time, I will just give you a bunch of the assignments, like one after the other. Normally, when we do the sessions like these, or when we're in a classroom setting, I will give the assignments one after the other. But just in terms of time, I'll give you like 2 or 3 assignments at one time so you can handle everything. So the first thing I'd like you to do is to go through the tool, kind of look through the cards a bit, and then choose a walking skeleton. So basically, it's a very simple, like, low-level process. Could somebody? I think there's somebody who has they're not muted. Yes, thank you very much. So so the basic process, like the backbone that we were talking about, is when somebody uses an app, they basically enter some search criteria. That's the step. That's the first step. Then the app comes back with a list of results, like a list of possible restaurants to go to. Then you can dig deeper. You can show some details and get some further information. And finally, any steps that you can make to arrange dinner. As a more general note, this backbone is not something that's going to be part of your backlog or whatever. So if you want to cut this up into smaller pieces, make it more fine-grained, or crunch it up and maybe say, well, there's too many columns, I want to kind of crunch them back together into one, that's all fine, right? This is just a very simple way of looking at it. And for instance, in your case, if you go like, I'd actually like to split the arranged dinner into multiple steps, by all means do so, right? But this is just for this example, these 4 columns. Okay, so now let's switch to the game. So if you're correct, you have this interface in front of you, and then what you can do now, where's my cursor? There it is. You here at the top, you see those four process steps, and at the bottom right, there is this green button. This green button is the deck of cards. So if we press that, you see basically already a lot of it has been given to you. There's even been said like in which column it basically fits. So you can go through them, read through them a bit, read through the descriptions, and all you then need to do if you want to pick one, you click on it, you drag it, and the moment you start dragging it, as you can see here, you can put it somewhere. And as you can see in these lines, you can basically put something in different slices where you go like this goes together, that goes together. So here I said now filter on rating. Here there's another one based on rating. That's an interesting one. And so basically you can construct a slice. Another thing to note: this is not a matrix. So that doesn't mean you have to choose exactly one card, or even that a card has to be in there at all. You could even also say, and I'm just dragging it out and pulling it back on this green card. Maybe you want to leave this column empty for now, which is completely fine. It's your choice. And you can also, if you want, you can put as many like cards in a slice. That doesn't matter. It's really up to you how thick or how thin you want to make it. It's really what it's all about. However, what is important, and that's what the title is here at the left, if you would consider this thing here to be a user story, and this thing at the left basically representing the whole slice, that's kind of your higher level user story, right? In Jira, you would see a mapping between user stories and epics, in the tool at least. In Azure DevOps, you would have a story feature epic. It's the first level up, whatever name you want to call it. And so maybe here would be a first version and say, well, find restaurants close to me, something like that. And that would be something like that, if that is your choice of, what do I think is the most important thing to do? And then maybe later you would have another title where you go say like, well, if I saw the rating one, well, let's do something with ratings, and let's implement ratings into it. It's kind of, this is some suggestions. By all means, like, make your own decisions in here. There's nothing wrong or right about the choices you make, as long as you can explain them within the context of the choices you make and say, well, therefore we have chosen this slice and this is how it fits together. Okay, so Shrikant, let's see. I see one. Do one row refer to one feature epic? Yes, in that analogy, I just saw it. Yes, it would be. So, let's just say if you use the word feature, because, and if we're a lot of us nowadays are using the Azure DevOps tooling by Microsoft. So whatever the first level up is, so whatever in your tooling your first level higher is above user stories, it's that level, and you would indeed want it to map onto one of them. So.
Sergey, how many groups would you like to have?
It's more the size of the group that matters, not so much the number, of course. I find that this works best if you can hold a better conversation if you're with 3, maximum 4 people per group. Otherwise, it's hard to hold a conversation.
Okay.
And so my suggestion is, as you're being divided into the groups, to have one person share their screen with the game, and then have that person be the one who basically does all the clicking, etc. You can, of course, have your own copy open to read it, but just make sure that that one person then does so you can together figure out your mapping.
So actually, I'm creating, based on this, the number of people we have, it will be around 20 rooms actually.
20 rooms, good. Let's see if we can overload Zoom.
So just to make sure that people understand, this URL which you just sent actually, which will be available in the breakout rooms as well?
No, it will not be available, I think, in the breakout room. So I'll repost it just to make sure. There we go.
So I think after we create the breakout rooms, you can broadcast the URL, and people start using that actually. Is it okay?
Yeah. And so somebody remarked, my internet connection is very bad. I'll watch from any of the groups. Sure.
Okay, so I'm creating breakout rooms. So these are automatic breakout rooms. People will move automatically to those breakout rooms.
And so we'll do it for 10 minutes. 10 minutes should be, I think we don't have so much time. Normally I take a bit longer, but just to give it a feel for the game, we'll just limit it to 10 minutes for now. Oh yeah. So I basically already gave the whole assignment. So this is what I want you to do. Create the walking skeleton and also kind of create more slices and name them, right? So try if you can kind of, with the group, create 2 or 3 slices. That would be nice.
Okay, so I'm creating it now.
Okay, cool.
So let's just, let me add a number of minutes. So it's done. And with that, I'm opening the rooms.
I've been invited to breakout room 1, by the way. Maybe it's good to hand somebody over to another if there's not enough people in that one.
Yeah, so I will take care of that.
Cool.
So even if the 3 people are there, that is also fine. So I think you can send the URL now.
But I think as far as I know, the chat isn't connected to the subrooms. I can repost it, but
let me just see. I should be able to.
I think you can broadcast. I don't think I can. No, I can just join. That's all.
Cool. So I'll do that. So broadcast message. I sent the message to everybody.
How is the story mapping work or plan if there is a commitment-based planning or having a fixed schedule? Oh, it actually works perfectly. We can talk about that. Shrikant, is it correct that there's 2 questions in the Slido thing?
Okay.
Is that because then it's actually fine because I can.
Yeah, actually, I mean, so far there are 2 questions. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that which is good. So it means that I can also see them.
Yeah.
Cool.
So as soon as somebody puts a question, everybody sees that, okay, and then they can vote on that.
Yeah.
Maybe I can join one of the group and see how people are doing it.
Cool. You see, somebody just came back in. Probably if they.
I'll assign.
Yeah, probably good to assign them. And so until what time is the 10 minutes finished?
Actually, there in the breakout rooms, there is a functionality of timer. So around 7 minutes now.
Okay. 7 minutes left, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Established, I really like rugged smartphones. The glass lampposts are pretty, and I do carry mine when I go out. But to be honest, if you want a fast smartphone with a great camera, there are really only a few top choices on the market at any time. There are loads of channels doing a great job revealing those, but I mostly like to focus on smartphones that will hold up in the workshop or on a job site. I do want to mention one thing though, whether you are getting a glass lamp or a rocket phone, estimate 2 to 3 years of use. Cell phone batteries only really recharge to a full capacity for about 2 years. Now that phones have built-in batteries and those batteries are such a hassle to replace, generally that's the usable lifetime of a smartphone. There's still lots of stuff you can do with them after that, like turn them into a file server or IP camera. But they aren't going to be very useful as phones. Don't get a rocket phone because you expect.
We have 7 minutes more. Yeah. So let's start with this story then. As a restaurant guest, I want to filter restaurants based on rating so that I know that the restaurant will be of high quality.
So
So
are
I
we
think
clear what needs to be done?
what we need to do is we need to basically enter what we are trying to achieve, right? So we have to establish what is the outcome that we are looking to achieve, right? So I think that title details you would want to put here,
Yeah, in the first
and
screen, what
then
you want to achieve.
and then look at the journey, right? Enter criteria, then view results, then view details. That's a journey, right, of how a persona would look at identifying the restaurant, right?
Yeah.
So given that perspective, now
in the
with
top,
this,
in the top, you can see enter the persona just to enter criteria, right? There is
yeah. So enter persona is basically, you can say,
so that is the restaurant guest as a restaurant
correct,
guest.
correct,
So we can enter that.
yeah.
It should not be over here actually. It should be where you're putting your criteria actually. Second one, second row.
No, in the second row, I think, yeah, whatever we are doing is fine. In the second row, it should be more of the main epic or the feature as what he told.
Yeah. So basically, what is the first release you are going to develop in the? So you need to pick
So
up.
the aim of this product was more to ensure that somebody who wants to get to a restaurant, a nearby restaurant, is what is the main criteria. And
Yeah,
he
like
goes to the restaurant and he finds those restaurant and gets him ready for the dinner. So
it's
that
like
is how
Swiggy
it's
actually, a Swiggy or Zomato actually.
correct. Yeah, that is how it says enter the criteria. So basically, on the enter criteria, as I read through, there are a lot of criteria in which you can search the restaurants, the closest by, either
Yeah,
based on
so
rating
the
or
So here
title,
location.
the
our
title,
particular story card talks about restaurant with rating. Okay, so based on rating.
Yeah, rating might not be like the MVP to start with. To start with, you need to find the restaurant.
So does this
Yeah,
make
this
sense?
here like it's a restaurant only.
So
Yeah.
But I'm just
does it
saying like
make sense to enter the title as get dinner?
I think we can do that probably once we figure out the core structure end to end, and then
Okay.
update. Yeah.
Okay, let's then look at the cards
Yeah.
then.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So if in the enter criteria, if we quickly go through, at least we will finish.
Restaurants based on rating so that I know that the restaurant will be is it of high quality or of high quality?
Yeah, I see this is spelling error. Yeah, spelling error here. It's of high quality indeed. Yeah, will be of which it should be with one F.
Okay, fine.
So this is spelling error.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we run through it somewhat quickly. So here you see something based on rating. Here you see find the restaurant closest to me. That's this one. Filter on opening hours. That's this one. This one. Let's see. This one is actually a nice one. It's like I want to arrange dinner with the restaurant that suits me best. Like here you see kind of like here. This is a weird one. It's a very big one, right? It's very very large.
Yeah.
Here you see filter based on ambience. Being able to sort store search criteria. So that's something like the top here. And if we go to this one, here we see something like that says based on rating. Again, here you can see, this is in listing based on sorting, based on rating. Here you can see the rating. Here's a very simple one. As a restaurant guest, I want to see all available restaurants in a list. So just a simple list.
Yeah.
Here is one that says, let's see, see all available restaurants on this, so I can choose. All right, this is really simple, right? Just a simple text description, just a restaurant name. That's it, right?
Okay.
Just very simple. Here is dietary wishes, right? This one says, does the restaurant cater to dietary wishes? So you can kind of see that in the list.
Yeah.
Wider format, and here on the bottom is like, you can see the distance, right, of the restaurant. So you can kind of sort based on distance. So that's what this is all about. So based on the first two columns, based on what you heard, like what do you think is more interesting as things like distance or rating, or a kind of, you know, what would you think a restaurant guest would want? What do you think?
I would say for me, I'll use myself as
yeah, just use yourself, perfectly fine.
Yeah. So for me, I want a restaurant that fits into my budget, that is close to where I am. I don't want to travel, because if I go long distance and a good meal, before I come back, I might just be hungry again.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
So I want somewhere that is the proximity is good.
Yeah. So here the closest to me, right? That's one. And I think you mentioned something about budget, right?
Yeah, budget. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you remember where based on diet, city.
So Serge, people have started joining again.
Yeah. I heard. Yeah. Where's the budget thing? Yeah, because you're correct. Because there was a thing on budget, right? Where did that thing go? Oh, here, save money. Right, this one. Promotion, so I can save money. You want something to save money?
Yeah.
That's something. Maybe here, let's see if there is anything based on. Oh, location. Maybe that's one, right? Because you want like location and budget. Let's like choose some cards based on.
Okay.
So I can find a meal for taste and budget. Special offers, budget. These are all budget things, right? So you go like, okay, budget stuff, budget. Let's choose the word budget. Boom, boom. And at the end, like arranging, what do you think? Would you want to leave it out for now, or do you want email, phone, kind of that kind of thing? What do you think would be a good idea here?
Phone.
Phone. Okay, so call, right? This is calling. That's it.
Yeah.
So here, basically, now if you take all this together and you want to give it a name, what kind of name would you give it then? Like what represents like the full functionality end to end?
Maybe do I say I wanted to say search criteria, but there's criteria there already. So
yeah. So I want to kind of like find a higher level concept that summarizes the whole thing. So we were talking about like budget and distance, right?
Yeah.
So I would let's make
consolidated inquiry.
So how would we name this this like end-to-end functionality?
So we can say either food nearest and the
within budget.
Within budget,
see, yeah. Find the cheapest food.
Nearest to me.
Nearest affordable.
Close by me, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
Right? Good. So here you can kind of see we've essentially created the higher level user story that is the representation of all the stuff under it, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things we could do, just as a suggestion, one of the things we can do, because it's close by me, and cheapest, both, right? We can make it smaller, right? Because we could go like, we could make a slice that's just focused on closest and a slice that's focused on budget. We could do that if we want to. So we could say, find. So this is one of the things I tend to do. I try to kind of squeeze it to make it smaller. By the way, there's nothing wrong about the slice we just created, right? There's really nothing wrong about it. It's a completely valid choice. But if as a product owner, I want to think about, well, this is still a bit of much work and I want to kind of compress it a bit further, I can see here like, both the budgeting stuff. So let's pull the budgeting stuff out. I'll go here. This is budget. This is budget. This is budget. Boom. And now I've made this one smaller and it's just based on distance. So we could already release a version that you find the closest restaurant, and then we release a version, and that's the cheapest restaurant. Right? Does it make sense?
Cool. Yeah.
Right? And this is kind of a way you can play around with story maps a bit. Also because sometimes, and this is actually where the functionality of the tool or of the game actually, you can show the slice and the card story points. You can turn those on. What if we actually had already counted these things in? So what you can see here is that now we have here. Oh, actually, we just happen to have made a slice of 9 story points, and here we've created a slice of 10 story points. So what if this velocity of the team would be 10? We would have like fit this perfectly into a sprint, which is pretty nice. So the slices don't have to really map onto a sprint, right? If their velocity is 20, they could do both slices at once, and we could basically do this again. Doesn't we can keep it. We can keep it like this and keep the old definition, but it's really up to the team and up to you to kind of figure out how do we want to slice it, how do we want to kind of keep the things together, what makes sense, right? It's really end to end. It's really about making sense. Does it belong together? And maybe another advantage that you may have found that we found now is, so let's if we do this one, find, oh wait, come on. So the cheapest food we did not, so find the closest restaurant to me. So, oh, to my, that's a spelling error, to me. So there's another nice advantage of this way of working. So Alberto, if you would have to choose, if you are the product owner now, and you would have to choose between cheapest first or closest first, what would you choose? What do you think is more important? Closest. Boom. So what's nice now is that because you've made the choice at the higher level, all the stories under it basically just come along with it, right? So basically we've ordered 6, and of course this is a play example, but we've ordered 6 stories with one decision, just saying this one higher level concept is more important than the other one, and all the stories basically go along with it. Now you can imagine if you start scaling up and you have like under a slice, it's very well, I've seen slices that have maybe 10, 20, 15 user stories under it. And by making that one high level decision, you can just go and move everything over. And you might also imagine that it's, if you were talking with your stakeholders, you want to be talking to this higher level. You want to kind of, like I was asking you, let's say I was your product owner and you are my customer. And I would say, look, Alberto, what would you want first, right? And we could reason about those 2 higher level concepts instead of going through every single lower level user story.
Okay.
So this is also really nice to communicate and to communicate with kind of at a higher level with your stakeholders. It also protects like teams from or for your stakeholders to go through all this low level stuff, right? Because you kind of get micromanagement, then you don't want that.
Yeah.
So, is that a bit clear, Alberto? How this works?
Yes, fine. Yeah, thank you.
Cool. You're welcome. Well, actually, I think because I was already thinking about what would be a good way to kind of discuss this whole thing with the group. So it was nice that we could do this and maybe show it a bit to the rest. So are there any other remarks, questions? Because I think, Shrikant, given the time, that we'll need some Q&A time, right?
So there's some small questions over here is, what is the difference between the title at the left and the goal at the right? So these are the questions coming.
Yeah. So if you want the relation, the enter goal, these are essentially acceptance criteria of the. If we have kind of thinking in DevOps terms, if the first level up from the user story is called the feature, then this would be the acceptance criteria, and that's the name. So this is the name of the feature. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like you're having a high level goal, and then you go through all these steps, and at the end you've achieved your goal. And so the goal is really about, but what does it really mean to achieve the end result? And you want that to be a business result. So your business user has achieved. So acceptance criteria in this example would be, let's see, guest has found closest restaurant. I mean, this is of course a play example, super simple, but there is no, right? There's no other good acceptance criteria than user has actually found it. That would be the distinction between the two. Make sense? I already also see, will the game link be available for us to try out later? Definitely. This game is online 24/7, so you can always play it. Shall I just go through the questions here, Shrikant?
Yes, please.
Okay, good. So the other question is, how is the story mapping work or plan if there is a commitment-based planning or having fixed schedule? Now, of course, if you have fixed schedule, that means you have to variate your scope, right? Because you have a fixed deadline. So what's the tweaking you can do? You have to figure out, okay, how much functionality, how much stuff can I fit into my fixed deadline? And that's exactly what this tool is for. Because if you have a fixed deadline, let's say, from a theoretical perspective, that we have, let's say we have 15 story points to use. Now here we can see the top is already 9 story points. This won't fit. So I can't put this one in, so I'll pull that down. So here we have now 9 story points, 5 story points. I only have enough budget for 14 story points. This is going to be my functionality. So story mapping is also, again, a great tool if you have a limited budget in time, which automatically means also a limited budget in your story points. Then you can kind of mix and match and make sure that you deliver something which still remains end-to-end complete, because you keep constructing those slices until you're full up. So I hope that answers your question. Jira doesn't have a lot of hierarchy, which limits to have so many slices. Anyway, are we dependent on the tools to have so many layers? Yes, indeed. This is a problem. There is, I believe, for Jira, there is a tool called Structure, I believe. There's a plugin, and they can actually cost some money. That is the only way I know of, at least in Jira, to kind of have a more full structure. One trick I use is in the naming of a Jira epic. I will then effectively make one of these slices a Jira epic, and I will use between braces. I'll put a higher level name to kind of group the epics into a kind of a higher level thing. It's a kludge, but it's the best thing I know how to do with Jira. Yes, we are definitely dependent, and it's also one of the things I would really like for a tool to have a mature way of dealing with hierarchical tools. That's actually why I'm happy that Azure DevOps already out of the box gives you 3 levels, which is actually perfect, because the lowest level is actually these stories. The next level up is a slice, and you could say the full epic would be a whole story map. So that's actually pretty nice. Bankai asks, the game that we played, how does it work in reality? We need to develop all the cards first or the horizontal first, right? Sequence of step here can help. Very good question. Because of the game, what you see here is that basically we're going from a low level to higher up, and we're kind of constructing the higher level goals as we go along. This is the case where you would have an existing backlog and you're trying to construct the higher level goals out of it. Indeed, in a normal case, the first thing you would do is create the backbone. So the first thing, like those steps of enter criteria, view results, view details, arrange dinner. So kind of like your business process, that's what you would describe. And then finally, you would create first the feature names and say, this is what I would like to implement end to end. Remember the telco case that we had? Like what would we need if we would add a child, right? That was the first question we asked. And then we were cutting across. So normally actually you go the other way around. Let's see, that's what we have. Which tools are available in the market to help us with story mapping with respect to visual representation and slicing? I would actually say any tool that mimics a wall of stickies could do, right? Because basically this is nothing else than just putting stickies on the wall. This is what we do in real life. In real life, we just have a wall, put stickies on the wall, make columns, make slices, etc. So really any tool that does that for you will be perfectly fine to use. Let's see. One practical problem I see in real time is we need to have a strong product owner team to have all the stories written for the overall picture of the epic. Yeah, sort of. Like I already said with the previous answer, this was indeed the case where all the stories were there and you had to kind of go upwards. You can also imagine that the story mapping, if you go from a high level to a low level, so you have a big epic saying, this is this process, we want to implement it, having first, like a first refinement, you have some names that you say, well, the version 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4 of that process, and then start refining it further down. You might imagine that you don't need to prepare everything, but you kind of start fleshing out the story map as you go along. So maybe in the first time, you just have the name here at the top left, and you start filling in these cards, and you basically you kind of start creating them as you go along. So you don't really need to prepare everything beforehand, just enough slices so that you're filled for the next sprint. Stories first or epics first, like my answer would be, actually, it could be both, because this is just a structural view, but the more common case tends to be epic first and you break it down. That's actually better, because then you always know towards which goal you are working. What will be the case with a complex domain like e-commerce website, because e-commerce has a complex flow? I've used this a ton in e-commerce. Actually, I considered e-commerce to be, from a process perspective, not even that complicated. Because it's a pretty kind of direct like case. I've used this like at the Dutch Amazon.com basically, and other websites. So definitely try it, as long as you have clarity on the flow. One thing maybe to answer, if that helps you, is that you keep the process here a bit generic, and like corner cases could also be slices, right? In the beginning, you just deal with like the common case, like people just pay with a credit card. Fine, let's implement that. And then later you have a more complex flow, which is not as common, but now we can also pay with like gift cards, right? And now we start implementing gift cards. And now, so exceptions and corner cases and things like that could also be versions of slices. Let's see. The story points mentioned here, are these presumed by the product owner or is it by the team? Never, ever, 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 ever will story points ever be done by a product owner, ever. Otherwise, you're doing it wrong. Team only. How should we use this if epics are still evolving? Yeah, well, that's of course, if epics are still evolving. One of the ways you could use this is actually kind of go into a lower level, use this as a discovery tool, brainstorm ideas, make some columns, brainstorm some ideas, figure out what your top slice is and go like, how interesting, towards which goal are we? And then write the epic. So you could also use this as a discovery tool. I think we went through all the questions as far as I...
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, those are two, like Vivek had two questions. One to think in terms of just the feature instead of thinking in terms of the flow. Okay. A feature in the definition here is a version of the flow. Maybe I haven't explained it clearly enough, but you could say a feature is, in this case, a slice is like version 0.1 of your flow, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, right? It's a version of your flow. One of the features we may want to implement would be order of food that I ordered last time. Yeah, so the food ordering process would be the general process. And then like the first version of it, like being able to order for that last time, is 1.0 of it, and then 2.0, etc. Developing an app would involve UI UX, database development integration. How can you plan a story map? Story reusing, story written for each of them. Well, this is general case, just like with any other like good user story. You don't want to create stories for your technical layers. You want to create stories around your functionality. And so if you would have a bit of functionality to be done, that should be including the UI, UX, the integration, and all the database stuff that goes into kind of fully implementing that functionality. So don't do that, right? Don't split it up into technical layers, because that's irregardless of story mapping technique. That's just good product backlog item practice. I think we went through them all. I think we were a bit over time, right? Or...
Yeah. So just want to say a couple of things over here is that, first of all, I have seen that people have been using story mapping, and they, instead of having that horizontal layer as a kind of business function, they may term it as a kind of release 1, release 2, release 3, whatever. So this is people have been doing, but I think what you just mentioned makes a huge amount of difference when you start thinking from a business perspective, and thinking like what a working skeleton will be looking like, what we can deliver as a feature overall, which is transcending to multiple layers.
Indeed, yeah. So for me, a release is not one slice, because that's way too big graphing, coarse grained. I actually consider a release tends to be a set of those slices.
Absolutely.
So a minimum viable product, actually one of the things I also see that's sort of a mistake, but that's a kind of a choice how you want to use the tool. What I think is important is that the slices makes end-to-end sense. I like to keep them fine-grained. So by the time I construct my release, I can choose multiple slices and say, okay, that's going to be the release.
Yeah, I think I mean, personally, I've found that one of the takeaway for me as well, because you can focus on the business value all the time, and can combine them together as a release as well. So that is really awesome. So, and at the same time, I think with the idea of the game, actually people can really see like how and they can really understand it in their teams, and that is also really awesome. So thank you so much, Serge, for coming over here, and it was a great session actually.
Yeah, thank you. It was fun to be here. Always fun to do these things. So, and of course, always have a fun to have an excuse to kind of talk with you, right? So that's also nice.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah. So you're welcome, everybody. Hope it was useful.
Thanks.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you
Bye-bye.
very much, Serge.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, Sergey, do you have a moment?
Yeah, sure. I do.
Yeah, I mean, I like the way you kind of explain in terms of value stream and how it makes sense to look at it from that perspective. It definitely makes sense when we are a large organization managing different pieces of work. But what if I'm a startup company? I just want the app to go out there. So I'm probably just thinking in terms of what's the most differentiating feature I can get it out there. For example, I like it when somebody brings up an example and explains it. So the food finder example, I just want the basic feature of find the restaurant nearby to be out there.
Yeah.
Right. So, when we start in thinking in terms of the what you had as I don't want to use the term flow, but I still go ahead and use the term flow.
Yeah, flow is fine. Flow is perfectly
flow.
fine. I mean, that's essentially what it is, right? It's a user flow.
Yeah. So we just want to get it out there, and when we are thinking in terms of flow, we actually are getting into the how domain. So why don't we just keep it at feature level, say the what, and leave it out there to the group of developers. Probably we just, let's say you're the founder, and I, Shrikant, and another person are the developers out there. Just leave it to us, and let's figure out the how.
Yeah. Yeah, perfectly fine. Actually, what you're referring to is, I think, is pretty close to the philosophy that Less has, right? As a scaling framework, they really find this. Well, the product owner kind of just does the more high level stuff, and then it's up to a team for themselves to write it. So I've seen so many variants in my time on different implementations of Agile, different corporate cultures. Yours is like a perfectly valid one where there is a sense where there is a bit of maturity in the team. They only need this higher level feature, and then they can use the story mapping technique to start plotting it out.
Correct.
Right. So yeah, but that sounds perfectly fine. So my story doesn't really, how you say it? It doesn't really say anything about who does it, right? It could very well be if you have a very immature team, they don't really know how to do it, or for other kinds of reasons, that might be a product owner does really need to write all the user stories. I mean, that's also a very common case. But yeah, I mean, I would totally agree if you have a mature team that is able to write their own user stories to do exactly that. Yeah, perfectly fine solution.
Yeah, but what you're saying makes a lot of sense when we have a large organization out there which does a lot of stuff. And like the telco example that you gave, where things exist and we want to come up with a family subscription plan, then I totally agree. The value stream way of looking at things makes more sense as compared to just looking at it in terms of only the feature. Got it.
Yeah. So that's also maybe my definition of a feature, because I was the only reason I used the term feature is because one of those very common used tools nowadays, Azure DevOps, uses the term feature as the first level up from the user story. But I have to me, everything is a story product backlog item, right? I have no love for any name. Like for me, it's just product backlog item, higher product backlog item, higher level. Mm-hmm. And some of them we give a name. I don't really care about it.
Can be an nth level of slicing. Actually, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So in my mind, so feature shouldn't be taken really literally in this sense. It's really just about higher level backlog item. That's really the term I'd like to use, or just the really weird name slice, because that's not really a name that's really used at the moment. And so that's also kind of why I say the fat is inside the features in that sense, because when we use a feature, we have this thing in our brain. Maybe a better way to say it, but there's still no like standard nomenclature for it. It's like a version of the process, right? Or you wanted to use the term flow, again, perfectly fine. It's like an implementation version of that flow. And so that to me would be whatever that is, that's the name. So if we call a slice or a feature or whatever, that's the name we would use.
Yeah, so for a feature, what I say is like, think of, let's say, a brochure for a new car that's released in the market. The brochure cannot list all the things. There'll be some 4 or 5 cool stuff in the new model of the car, and they state that. So for me, I see them as features, something quite differentiating, and you just want to put it in a single line, and people can get it.
Yeah, and so maybe so the way I like to think about story maps and their slices is more in terms of like versions. Maybe you could say feature version, right? So we're going to bring the first version of it. It's sort of crappy, but it's okay, but it works, right? And then you make another one which is a bit more beautiful and a bit more beautiful, a bit more beautiful. And to me, that's what they really represent. They represent versions of the thing.
Interesting. But this was quite thought-provoking, and I liked it that you mentioned that you spoke to the person who came with the concept of story map and got some clearer understanding, and then started to share this knowledge with us. Thank you so much. That was really very nice.
I've really tested this because I've asked Jeff Patton, and also I've co-trained with Jeff Sutherland for about 12 years now. Oh, wow. I also posed to him the question, and they said, "Look, Jeff, am I stupid?" Or like, it's one of those things like, am I driving at the wrong side of the road, or is everybody else driving on the wrong side of the road? Right? That's kind of a joke we have in the Netherlands. I don't know if you have this. You probably have a similar joke. Like, there's on the radio, there's somebody like there's what you call a ghost driver. Somebody driving on the wrong side of the road, and so the guy looks out the window and goes like, one person, like hundreds. And so, so that's how I feel, right, on this topic. So I really checked it with Jeff. I checked it with Jeff, and they said, no, you're right. So that's actually why I'm pretty comfortable basically saying everybody else is wrong. So yeah.
So probably now you're driving on the right side of the road, and people are thinking that, okay, this guy's maybe
I kind of hope to pull everybody to my side of the road, and